Hello and welcome to another edition of Liberty Ballers Hoops Hangout. I'm Jake Pavorsky, joined as usual by Roy Burton, and in place of Jake Fisher tonight, we have another LB writer. We have Sean O'Connor. Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jake. How about you?
Doing good. Roy, how about yourself?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
We're all good over here. It's been a fun week. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so we got a lot to talk about, and obviously the main thing is the draft.
Yes.
Draft was Thursday. In case you missed it, drafted a lot of players, traded a bunch of people, and I got the full list right here. We have Joel Embiid at 3. We have Dario Saric at 12, who they acquired from Orlando in exchange for Elfrid Payton. They took KJ McDaniels at 32, Jeremy Grant from Syracuse at 39, Pierre Jackson they acquired in exchange with the New Orleans Pelicans at, I believe, was 47 for Russ Smith from Louisville. They drafted Vasilije Micic, I hope I pronounced the first name right, at 51. And then at 58, they got Jordan McRae. So, guys, what is your overall thoughts on the draft, and what kind of grade would you give that night? Roy, we'll start with you.
I'm always of the opinion that it's kind of too early to give grades at this point. But I guess if I have to put a letter grade on this, I'd say an A-. I guess. I mean, I love the Embiid pick. I was on board with that from the jump. I love the Saric pick. I even love the fact that we actually got our first rounder back from Orlando in that trade. So actually, I like that a lot. Second rounders are second rounders. I mean, if you hit on any of these guys, one or two of these guys become role players, then I think that's a good draft. I mean, I like McDaniels a lot. He has a high quality NBA skill already, so I think he'll find a spot. Pierre Jackson's a scorer. We need guys who can put the ball in the basket. We have a couple of guys that may or may not pan out. So again, I like the draft. I'm not one of those guys who needs a guy who's going to put up 15 points right away. So I'd probably give this draft an A-.
Sean?
I'm a little lukewarm on the Embiid pick personally, just because of knowing the downside that there's potentially there with Embiid. But aside from that, I basically loved everything else that they did. They definitely need more talent on the team right now, and so I'm more of a fan of taking as many second rounders as they could to play now and seeing if they could work out, rather than drafting statues for more trade assets later. They have those already, so taking only one of those and taking 4 players in the second round and trading for Pierre Jackson, I like that strategy. And I definitely loved everything to do with the Saric pick. For those that don't know the background of that one, apparently what happened was with 30 seconds left on the buzzer, for the 10th pick, they called Orlando and said that they were taking Elfrid Payton and that they could give them what the Sixers basically, whatever the Sixers wanted, so that they could actually get him, because they telegraphed pretty clearly with picking Aaron Gordon at 4 that they needed a point guard at 12. And Elfrid Payton was by far the best available, according to most people. So they took that gamble and in return got their first-round pick later in 2017 that was previously protected for the lottery, as well as a second-round pick next year, which is just a great trade. So if I had to give him a grade, I'm not as high on the Embiid pick, but that's something for another day, I think, just because there's a lot of downside there, and I think he won a little bit of a higher floor with the 3 pick. But if I had a grade, I'd definitely say the A- to B+ range is probably where I'd also put that. They didn't get exactly who they wanted, but they made out pretty well given what they were given.
Right. As much as it hurts to take Embiid instead of Parker Wiggins, and we won't talk about Parker Wiggins that much because I know it hurts everyone to do so. But I give him a solid B. I mean, I like the best player available approach, because when you're a team that's not talented like the Sixers are right now, you take the best guy who's there and you sort of try and fill in the pieces. But I share Sean's sentiments when I say with Embiid, because there's a chance that he might not be the same guy he was at Kansas, or that he might not step on the floor and make the impact that we thought he could. And it's been the thing lately in the NBA it's been sort of a hesitance with big men, especially 7-footers, where as soon as they get hurt, you see guys slide. Like Noel last year with the torn ACL, which I think in comparison to breaking the navicular bone in your foot is sort of minute in comparison, because that's something you can come back from in this day and age with modern science and stuff like that. So, and he fell to 6. So you're taking Embiid at 3. So it's an okay pick. I think from a fan standpoint, I probably would have rather taken Exum, just because it's someone you'd rather have play this year. Like it hurts to think that they're going to have the same team as they did last year, plus Noel. But I sort of like Embiid. He's got the highest ceiling of everyone in the draft, I think. and if you can get him to turn out to be, the top guy, like a franchise center, he's got the talent to do so. Sarge, I've been watching clips of him today, and I love him. There's just something fun about him. I was totally not on board at first, and I hate the fact that he won't be able to come over for a year or two. But he's fun to watch. Point forward, you can see the floor like nobody else. Working on his shooting, so that's a nice pick. McDaniel's a nice 3-and-D player at best. I don't like Jeremy Grant. I feel like he's 6'9" with a 7'3" wingspan, and he's a tweener, which is horrifying because he doesn't have the outside shot, but he's still not strong enough to bang down low, and I don't know if he ever gets out of that. I feel like everyone compares him to Thad Young because everyone says Thad Young is a tweener, but I don't feel like they're the same player because Thad can step outside and shoot, and Grant can't do any of that. All I've seen Grant do is dunk right now and play a little bit of defense. So, I mean, everyone says it's a value pick at 39, and I completely agree, but that doesn't mean I have to like him. And with guys like Nick Johnson also on the board, and I think there was another guy, I can't remember who was also there, but I like Nick Johnson, and they needed a shooter. So I would have rather had that than a guy like Jeremy Grant. I don't get the Syracuse pipeline that they're trying to build right now, but Pierre Jackson picking him up was great. They needed a third guard desperately, and I like him a little more than I like Russ Smith. So Pierre will give Tony Roten a run for his money when it comes to the backup spot. Meach is a nice draft and stash. I actually like him a lot. I've been watching some clips on him. Sees the floor pretty well, shoots it kind of well. I sort of see him as a poor man's Manu. I was talking to Jake Fisher about that. Nice little comparison. He's kind of a gunner from three. And McRae is what he is. Nice off-ball player, can shoot the ball decently well. And for a guy who's 6'5", he's got a 7-foot wingspan, which is absolutely ridiculous. Just crazy long arms, which will be nice for building up his defensive potential. But I give it a solid B. But I think, and the reason I give it a B is because you're building up for the future, and I like that. It's great that you have guys going for the future if it all goes well. And there's a chance it doesn't go well. I'm completely concerned about Embiid's health. I'm concerned that they don't have the scoring right now. As you look at this team, MCW can't shoot. Noel is very raw offensively. He still hasn't played. He's been working out in the gyms, and we get that. He's getting better and getting stronger. We still don't know what he can do. Embiid might not be the same guy. And Sarge, again, Sarge's shooting is getting better, but at the same time, he's still not a strong shooter. That's not one of his strong points. So I give it a B. But we're back at the same point where we're tanking next year. And next year's draft is full of big men. So are you looking forward to tanking next year? Do you think it was the right move to sort of admit that you're going to be taking that step back and sitting there and tanking again? We'll start with Sean this time.
I thought this was always the plan to begin with, just because I knew we didn't have our first-round pick next year. And I'm perfectly okay with it. Unlike this past year, I will not be actively rooting for losses because I know there's more of our core in play. Because at the beginning of last year, I wasn't even sure Michael Carter-Williams would amount to anything. And I knew the rest of our starting lineup was mostly rental players, people that were just space fillers until we got the people that we actually wanted. This coming year, we're going to have a few more of those guys coming in with Noel and some of the second-round picks if they end up sticking, along with guys like Hollis Thompson and other leftovers who stick around. There's going to be more players that might end up being part of the equation eventually. And so I'm okay with us rebuilding in that regard, but I will actually not be rooting for losses. So okay with the strategy, won't be gung-ho, yeah, loss, So
yeah, but does winning help you this year, though? That's the thing, though. Winning still doesn't help you this year. It doesn't get you anything. It's still the same plan as last year. Is you need to get as far up that draft board as you can.
I mean, it's the same plan, but again, I still don't think that they're in a position to threaten, the possibility of losing a top 5 pick. I mean, this team still doesn't have a lot of talent. Like last year, I think it was a blatant, we're not going to try to fill this roster out with talent to get wins. Between Michael Carter-Williams and Noel and some of the guys you drafted, you're gonna have more talent than you had last year. I mean, granted, you're probably not going to sign a free agent that'll come in and they'll kind of give you an extra 5 or 6 wins. But I don't think this is a blatant quote unquote tank job like we saw last year. And even with this talent, it'd be a shock if this team won any more than 28 or 30 games.
Honestly, I'm not sure they win more than last year. I think they win less.
You think so?
They don't add anyone.
I don't know about that. I think
remember we spent half the year with 3 actual NBA players and then traded away one of them and then got rid of a high variance guy in Turner who artificially added wins to the total based off the few good games that he actually had. If we don't add any shooting and we don't add any players in free agency, I don't see a team that's better than the one that started last year. And we finished last year, if I remember correctly, something like 4-32. And if we're just adding Noel and maybe KJ McDaniels to that, I don't think that pushes you in the 20. I don't think it pushes you to 20. I think we're going to be squarely around the 15 to 16 range again, as of now.
I think they did sort of overachieve at the end there. I think we sort of thought that they would sell off a little earlier than they did, and the wins they got at the end of the year were sort of a surprise. I think I had the prediction at 11-71, but which is horribly low, and I can't believe even looking back that I picked that low. But it's when you look at the draft next year, it's all big men. The top of that draft is all big men. You have Cliff Alexander, you have Jahlil Okafor, you have Karl Towns. These are the top guys coming out of the draft next year. But you look at the shooters. You have Hazonia, who from Croatia, who I love. I don't know if he's a top 5 talent. Stanley Johnson, another guy, decent shooter, strong body as a swingman. I don't know if he's a top 5 pick, and that's probably where they're going to land. So I'm concerned about the strategy of sitting back and basically sort of throwing your hands up and throwing up another year to trying to build through the draft. I mean, once again, I completely understand that they needed to take best player available, but if you could bring in a guy like Exum or something like that, if they drafted him, it sort of helps going forward, and I think you build the core offensively because the draft next year just simply doesn't have the talent you're trying to fill. They filled the big men spots. They need to fill the shooters now, and I don't know if next year's draft can help with that.
I think you can get a shooter in next year's draft, but like you said, if those guys aren't top 5 talents, that doesn't mean you have to take a Zonja or a Wayne Selden or whoever, with the 2 or 3 pick. I mean, you get the high pick, that's your asset, and then you flip that to another team to get, maybe a number 5 or number 6 pick, and then maybe something else from that team. I mean, I think, I get you. I probably wouldn't take right now. I probably wouldn't take any of those shooting guards or any of those guards or wing players at that spot. But again, that wouldn't stop me from, trying to get, a high pick in order to say, hey, this is what we have now. Let's see if we can flip this to whoever ends up at 6 or 7, get the player we want, and get some more assets down the road.
Right, and that leads me sort of to my next question when it comes to the strategy of tanking. Is that are you guys still on board with Hinkie? Because I remember at his press conference, he said we need the internet here to help us along and sort of help us here as we sort of build this way through the draft. And he also made a point of how receptive the fans are to what they're trying to do here and the way they're trying to build. And I thought that was kind of interesting because Philadelphia's always been sort of a win-now kind of city.
Yeah.
And Hinkie's sort of won them over as to the patience element and allow me the time to build this team through the draft. So are you still on board with him? Roy, I guess we'll start with you this time.
All right, yeah, I'm fine with this. I'm cool with this. As a pure basketball fan, yes, this is hard to watch. I can't really recommend that Sixers fans watch 82 games of this next year because, quite frankly, it's pretty difficult. But that's what League Pass is for. If you want to watch good basketball, watch League Pass. Watch TNT, watch ESPN. There's plenty of games. It's hard to watch, and again, you can't go down and purchase season tickets for it. But I'm okay with this because, again, this is really what it's this is what you have to do in the NBA. It's a kind of a necessary evil in that in order to kind of build something that's sustaining for 5, 6, 7 years, you need to have a down period. You need to have a period where you go through this rebuilding process. So I'm fully on board with the I guess the 5-year rebuilding process as we're calling it.
Right, and whenever you enact something like this, the problems people have are not necessarily with the strategy itself, but when people get impatient and they only go halfway on the tanking, that is when
Right.
teams get in trouble. When owners get impatient, when fans get impatient, when they abandon the strategy early and don't get all the people that they actually need to rebuild. We saw it here a few years ago when we got Evan Turner number 2 in the draft. We sacked, I think we were something like 26 and 56 that year. And then immediately, instead of being patient, trying to rebuild through young players, even if that ended up being the wrong pick, we didn't sink as far low as we really needed to in order to do a proper rebuilding job. We just built ourselves back up in mediocrity. And so the teams that that are patient enough to go through multiple drafts and to draft multiple players with talent, those are the ones like the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to use them as the example because they're kind of an outlier, but it's basically that same formula. You have to be patient with your own players, and you also have to be patient with hey, it's going to be losing for a few years, but look at what we can possibly get afterward. And so I'm fully on board with it. And if you went into it thinking that it was going to be 1 or 2 years of pain before the Sixers were in actual contention or making significant progress, then you were probably misguided. So I'm fully on board with the plan as it stands, and I'm fully ready to endure another painful season, knowing that the reward at the end could be very
well.
big.
If I was to play devil's advocate here, the whole thing is they've been preaching a 5-year plan. Has been the whole thing all along. 5 years we'll be ready to compete. Do you think this past draft with Embiid being out for a year, Sarge not coming over for, let's just say, 2 years, do you think this pushes them farther back from their 5-year plan? Do you think it's more of like a 6 or now a 7-year plan? Which I get in the long scheme of things may not be a big difference, but it's still, people get restless. And I mean, it's hard to watch your team be miserable year after year. So is this the sort of thing that's going to push the map back to say?
If you don't mind me just jumping in here.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that would push the math back would be if Embiid is not healthy to play after next year. Because what pushes the math back is not having to wait a year or two, I don't think. The problem is that when you get these assets at the top of the draft, which are very valuable, and then you strike out on them, that is what pushes your time frame back, because you end up having fewer assets and fewer good players. So long as you actually hit on the draft picks, which is not a guarantee at all,
right,
then using the strategy is on that time frame, I think is fine no matter when they actually come over, especially since in Embiid's case he's going to be learning the Sixers playbook and he's going to be working with their trainers, working with Akeem Olajuwon. And in Sarge's case, he's playing 2 years at a high level in another league in a focal role. So I don't think it pushes them back too far so long as the players end up being productive and actually, in both cases, both Embiid and Sarge, they actually end up playing. If they don't, if Sarge doesn't come over, or if Embiid's injuries prove to be more than just a 1 or 2 time thing, then the plan goes to 6 and 7 years. And then people should rightfully lose their patience, and then the rebuild is an issue.
Yeah, and I agree with. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Sean. But
I was just going to say that's why the Embiid pick is such a ballsy move, because he does have a downside of, hey, he just may never play, and the Sarge move has the same thing. At 12, I was willing to make that gamble. At 3, I was not as much. So that's why I'm slightly critical of that. But go ahead, Roy. Sorry about that.
No, just to kind of just dovetail off the point. I agree with everything you said as far as the timetable being pushed back. The thing is, just think about it. Like, the oldest guy in this rebuild is Michael Carter Williams. He's 22. Mm-hmm. So if he's going to be, let's project this out 4 years from now, he'll be 26. Everybody else will be 25, 24. On the precipice of their primes, or just kind of coming into their own in the NBA. So, when this rebuild is over, those guys will be, in the prime of their 20s, and by that time, even Embiid will have 3 years in the NBA, hopefully, to his credit. So, I mean, I think I'm not really worried. I think in 5 years, this team should be at the level of, I don't want to, I'll say Golden State maybe by that time, where they're a consistent contender in the conference for years to come.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I saw with Sarge, too, and whoever made this point was good, is that him not coming over for 2 years also sets back him signing the rookie contract for 2 years. Right. That's 2 years closer to his prime. He's 20 now. He'll be, let's just say, 22, 23 when he comes over. So it'll be more so to his prime, and you'll have him on that cheap rookie deal when you're trying to bring in free agents. But another thing that's come about with this draft is sort of the pieces and fitting. Because you saw, I keep talking about this, best player available. The team keeps harping on it. That's what they took at 3. That's what they took at 12. And Hinkie at his press conference, somebody asked him, how are these going to fit? And he literally said, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Which is kind of scary when you think about this, because holy crap, you just drafted these guys and you have no idea how they're going to fit into this team. So, and people keep saying Noel can play the 5 or Embiid can play the 4, and the team can fit and you can bring all these pieces in. And I'm not so certain about that. To me, I don't think Embiid and Noel can play. And Embiid at the 4 offensively, playing him in the post, I don't want that. I want him with his back to the basket, using those Olajuwon-esque post moves that he's sort of built up. I mean, he's played basketball for 3 years, but the things he's been doing at Kansas with his back to the basket and with his footwork is advanced far beyond his years. So having to have him step out, granted he can shoot the ball, and to have him space the floor and knock down threes would be great. But what his strength is with his back to the basket and playing in the low post. And granted, so that's Nerlens Noel's too, because you can try and work on his jump shot, and you watch the vines of him in practice, and he's knocking down like a dinky one from like near the free throw line. But that's not what his game is. So I'll start with Roy first. Do you really think these guys can fit? Not even mentioning Sarge.
I think the potential's there, but there's a lot of concern. You're right. Somebody has to play away from the basket. I think Embiid's the guy you want to play at the the classic back to the basket low post guy. You just have to, or we just have to kind of pray that the Sixers have built, rebuilt Nerlens Noel's shot to the point where he can hit that face-up jumper. Because again, if he can't do it, then you got to move one of these guys. And you probably move Noel because he's the one with the lower ceiling. But I understand. Again, I was on board with the Embiid pick more than you guys, so I understand the take it and figure it out kind of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of figuring out that needs to be done with these guys, and one of them, probably Noel, is going to have to be that guy who plays the four.
Yeah, and the Sixers have a problem in that they have no shooting in any position right now, and so it doesn't even matter right now whether it's at the 4 or the 5 that they play to me, because you need people around them that can space the floor. I'm very much a proponent of 4 out, where you have a big who could space, whether that's to the 2 or preferably to the 3-point line. And while Embiid has the better shot right now, as I agree with both of you, you'd rather have him closer to the rim, and because it's not like Nerlens Noel is going to punish anyone down the post. He's lighter than everyone. Doesn't really have post moves. So. Yeah, it's definitely a conundrum, but defensively, you have to think about it that way too. I mean, Noel is such, at least from what I saw of him in college, he's such a rangy defender that he almost seems to be just as much of a prospect defending pick and roll action as a 4 as he does just defending at the rim as a 5. He's so rangy, able to get a lot of steals even. So I'm very intrigued to see how it works defensively, and maybe because it would possibly have so much defensive potential, you try to make it work however you can offensively.
Mm-hmm. And defensively with Nerlens at the 4 too, when you have him guarding out on the 5 post, what I saw a lot of him can do at Kentucky was steal the ball and then go out and transition it and take it himself. So as well as his shot blocking abilities, which are great, you can have him at the 4 and making steals and playmaking, getting out and transitioning, running the fast break with McDaniels and MCW and whoever else. But then you sort of work in Sarge into the whole deal. Sarge is sort of considered a stretch 4 guy who can fit either the 3 or the 4, but he can't really shoot. And what I've also noticed from watching him is, and I think his team Sabonia, and now it's a new team in Turkey. But when he was playing in Croatia, his thing was point forward. He was always bringing the ball up, either dishing it out or attacking the basket himself. And that sort of brings me to what do you do with MCW now? Because MCW, the way he creates with the ball in his hands, because you can't have him off ball yet, he's not the kind of guy who can just step up and shoot. And I think when you bring in Sarge, you're sort of wasting his abilities if you don't have him running the point. At least maybe not all the time, but a good majority of the time, that's what he does best. And if you think of this core as going to be MCW, Noel, Embiid, and Sarge, I don't know how you get all these pieces to fit. I was talking with Elliot Short-Parks of NJ.com after the draft, and he sort of said it's like taking a bunch of end pieces of a puzzle and trying to fit them together. It's tough to see if it's going to work or not. And I think it's a genuine concern as to whether these guys can fit in. Roy, when you look at Sarge, do you think there's a fit with him in this offense?
I think there's a fit, but yeah, again, your concern is very valid. I mean, he's got the point forward instincts, and him and Michael Carter Williams will probably, I don't want to say butt heads, but they have skills where you want both of those guys to kind of be primary ball handlers to some extent. But here's the thing: I don't know if we have to figure this out now. I mean, I think we have time. Even if let's say we're 3 years down the road and everybody's here, and you have 1 year of everybody in the system. Figuring out what everybody's strengths and weaknesses are. You can find a Michael Carter Williams replacement or another point guard who's more suited to play with these other 3 guys at that point. I don't think you have to kind of figure out now who your primary ball handler is going to be when you're 4 or 5 years down the road. I think you have a little bit of time, but again, just to get back to your point, I think there's some validity to it. I want to see Sarge handle the ball a little bit more, but again, he doesn't have to be the dominant guy. But that is a skill that you want to use, like the Bulls did with Tony Kukoc back in the day. Somebody like that, where you can bring your point guard off take your point guard off the ball, and if you had a guy who can shoot a little bit, then you have another weapon in your arsenal that you can use on offense.
Yeah, and I have a soft spot for point forward, so I'm pretty much going to say that Sarge could fit with anybody because you should fit around him. He's a point forward; he can play with anyone. No, no, the concerns about fit are very valid, and I think a lot of the Sarge pick is just as much that he is an asset that will likely continue to get better over the next 2 years, and is also eminently tradable. And teams are expecting him to come over in 2 years. So there's kind of a time frame there where you know that, hey, you can get a really good player at a position where you're not going to find too many people with those qualities. But I will say this about Sarge before we move on. The fit in Philly is going to be weird with those three. And it's possible you could just put them in a three-man rotation, have them all play about an even amount of minutes. But teams have tried that with their bigs in the past, and it's not always worked. Detroit, for instance, this year tried the Josh Smith, Andre Drummond, Greg Monroe threesome, and it was just disastrous. They tried them together, they tried them apart. And no matter what way it worked, people were either griping about minutes or about role. It was just very clunky no matter what they tried. And so having three really quality starting bigs, as we think all three of them will be, I don't know how you actually split up that time. And then one more point about Sarge. I think before we move on, he's promised that he's coming over in 2 years, right? Yeah. If he stays over for 3, doesn't he? Isn't he not subjected to the rookie salary scale? I think I might be.
Yeah, that's right.
I heard. Yeah. So if he decides to stay over that extra year, I'm not sure that asset's as valuable. So
right.
That's part of the problem with Sarge. You want him to come over in 2, and he's like promised and said he's not a liar.
But yeah, that was, oh my God, that interview with him, I'm telling you, that was the best things I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm no liar, I come back to Philadelphia. And he said he could come back next year or after next season. It's something we'll talk about, and is what he said. And then Hinkie sort of is like, no, he'll come over in 2. So I don't know, they got some beef to work out there. They need to get on the same page is what I'm saying. But I think when you look at every player as someone who is a tradable asset. I get that everyone has a price tag, and I understand that from a GM perspective. But when you look at everyone and say he could be traded, MCW could be traded, if Embiid plays well, Noel could be traded. That's not how you build a franchise. That's just how you keep recycling, and you keep coming back to the same spot as where you're taking away talent. You're not necessarily building up pieces that fit around each other. And that is my biggest concern about this whole thing and this entire draft, is that you're looking at all these guys that, okay, if Embiid outplays Noel could get out of here. Instead of trying to plug in a guy like maybe an Exum or somebody like that who could have played off ball and who could have tried to work it out like that. Granted, MCW and Exum might have stepped on each other's toes, and there could have been an issue with that. But it gets scary to the point where you're talking about possibly, every guy could be traded here, and that you don't know what you're going to have here, and nothing's a guarantee. I get that with the draft. But it's a slippery slope, basically, is what we're on here.
Right, and I agree with that to an extent. I know when Daryl Morey said it, so I'm not going to say it's a Sam Hinkie thing, but it might as well be. That when you were not a competitive team and not ready to win a championship, one of the things that they pride themselves on is either making the small deals to gain more assets, which obviously Hinkie has done with all the second-round picks, but also knowing that, hey, you may have to reshuffle the pieces constantly, just trying to figure out a formula that works. And if you look at the Houston Rockets over the past 6 years, look at the turnover of that franchise.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They went through like 4 or 5 different franchise point guards, just trying to find one where they could boost up the value of that guy enough to eventually turn them into other greater things. I don't think you can do that here because we have so many young players, and again, they all play the same positions. So it might be a little bit harder here, but I understand at least the philosophy there. They they're trying to like not just make the players here better, but they're also trying to get better ones and seeing which ones work with each other. And if it doesn't work, they're not willing to wait to cut ship.
Right. And I think we'll get past that because I think we've completely killed that argument. And I think we're all sort of on the same page here as to our concerns. So we'll flip the script to free agency, which starts on Tuesday. I think the Sixers have like 5 or 6 guys on the roster right now, so they're not really fielding a full team. So they've got some needs they need to address. They've got some guys they can possibly resign. I sort of pointed out James Anderson, Hollis Thompson, and Henry Sims as guys they could bring back. James Anderson simply because holy shit they don't have a 2 guard. Like they need someone to actually play the 2 guard. So like, he's just a body you could literally throw in there as cheap and tell him to go play shooting guard. And he played decent at points. It's a shame that he didn't shoot the ball as well from three as we would have liked. But like he's still a body who can like handle his own at the two, and playing next to MCW, I think he'd be okay. Hollis Thompson looked great at the end of the year. Hollis would. I don't know. He's sort of a fun guy to watch, and as like a 3-and-D type role. It's sort of you could trade him off and on with McDaniels. I think one of the two of them could compete for a starting job, and the other one could come in and fill the same exact role. And Henry Sims too. Henry Sims was a beast last year, which it's horrifying to say because Henry Sims is not a good player. Henry Sims is mediocre at best. But on this team, he was one of the better guys last year as like a blue collar type player who just came in and worked hard and was strong defensively. Made it happen on the offensive end, although it was sloppy and not always pretty. But those were three guys I highlighted as guys you could bring back, and I didn't really look outside the team. So, Sean, is there anyone you see out there that they could bring in?
Well, it's hard to bring in people when you're actively trying to lose.
Yeah,
and then a lot of the people also will not fit your time frame for contention. So a lot of people that are hitting free agency now are in the 25, 26 range already. They're going to be exiting their prime looking for another contract by the time that you're ready to compete. So you're going to be looking for the standard like undrafted free agents that we're going to have in summer leagues, both of them. And you're going to have other people that maybe like on the fringes of the NBA. But I would rather just bring back the people that kind of know the system so they could work with the people that we're bringing in. Similar to what you were saying. I think the guys you mentioned were all non-guaranteed contracts.
They were.
So they'll at least be probably in summer leagues, except for James Anderson, who's probably played his way out of it.
Although Roger Mason Jr. is there. He's like 34 now. He's still trying to get a job through summer league. So you never know who shows up there. Summer league's always fun.
Oh, wow. How are you, Roger Mason? How are you? You're in summer league.
Woo!
Yeah. I kind of like to talk to him, actually. I don't think there's any major free agents. As much as I love Chandler Parsons, he does not fit the current style of the franchise. I wouldn't mind it, but I don't really think there's anyone, aside from maybe Gordon Hayward, who you'd really make a run for.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you're going to get, again, the run-of-the-mill fringe guys, the, Darrell Wright type of guys. I mean, it'll make Levin happy if you go after, like, Xavier Henry or somebody like that. But you're not going to get anybody, high-caliber guy to come in to be your shooter. I like the three guys that you talked about that were here last year, Anderson, Thompson, and Sims. They all deserve another spot here. And, again, you're going to have, I guess most of the second-round picks that are here, McDaniels, and the other two guys that are here, Pierre Jackson, I guess you're going to count him. I think most of those guys are going to be here on the roster as well. So I think you're going to be able to fill out a roster with between the guys that you already had and the guys that you picked up in the draft and a couple of random guys here. I really, again, this isn't going to be a talented roster by any stretch, but I think you'll be able to find reasonable NBA players, and your bench might be a little bit stronger than the one last year that had guys like James Nunnally and Byron Mullins and all that.
I can't believe Mullins opted out. Can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
Oh my God, that was incredible. That was like a gift from heaven. Like Byron Mullins turning down guaranteed money to go chase his options in the free agent market is incredible. I'm excited about it. Like this is how I get myself excited for the season. I talk about Byron Mullins opting out of a 1-year deal worth $1.05 million. This is what gets me amped right now.
Byron Mullins wants stability. He wants to know, where he can hang his hat for the next 3 or 4 years. So, I don't blame him. He's 7 feet tall. Somebody will give him $1 million somewhere. So, I mean, I wouldn't have done it, but I don't blame him either.
Good riddance. That's it. That's all I got.
I don't think we could have said that any better. And that's probably how we'll wrap this up. I think we're going to say goodbye to Byron Mullins, and I think we're going to say goodbye to the viewers as well. For myself, for Roy, for Sean, thanks for hanging out with us tonight, and we'll do this again soon. See you later, guys.